Thanks for tuning in. My name is John Reed. This presentation captures my early involvement in the restoration of Save A Connie's L-1049H Super Constellation, November 6937 Charlie, named Star of America. It also captures very rare full audio footage of its maiden post-restoration test flight on July 17, 1989. You'll witness the pre-flight apprehension, the startup, taxi out, and the very first takeoff and climb out of 37 Charlie under the Star of America banner. That flight originated at Kansas City Downtown Airport and terminated at nearby Kansas City International for some major avionics work. Interestingly, this was on the very same day of the maiden flight of the Northrop B-2 Spirit intercontinental stealth bomber. Star of America was also the very first post-era constellation resurrection and restoration in the world, and the most ambitious vintage aircraft restoration project since that of the commemorative Air Force's B-29 Superfortress Fifi. There are numerous YouTube and other good videos of Star of America, which was actively flown by Save A Connie for 16 years from 1989 to 2005. In 1991, long before YouTube and the internet, I happened to be the very first to release and market a video on Save A Connie's Super Constellation, which was sold worldwide. Today, there are also endless good quality videos of subsequent constellation restorations, including those of the much more recent Breitling Super Constellation operating in Europe, which is also now grounded indefinitely as of 2019. In case you wonder how I got here, I'd been following the decline of the heavy piston airliners since 1969 when I was 14 years old. As a growing boy, I remember them dominating the skies over my house in St. Louis, slowly and majestically growling overhead long before jetliners. But in '69, I experienced an epiphany that these aircraft were suddenly rare and rapidly disappearing from the skies. Jets had solidified their position in world travel, so I started a log on my aerial sightings of old piston Douglas's, Lockheed Constellations, Martin liners, and Convair liners, an activity which became futile as sightings dwindled to almost nothing in a very few short years. Despite a complete lack of public awareness or interest, in 1971 my dad was able to find and then purchase for me a rare book on the Lockheed Constellation by Terry Morgan, published in the late 1960s. Unbeknownst to me at the time, this book would be my first exposure to Star of America 37 Charlie, a full 16 years before Save A Connie. On page 49 of this book appeared two close-up photographs of her in freight service with Slick Airways, her original owner. Take note of the thick stripes on the vertical tails, which were a dark blue. This image will resurface here in a few minutes. I then spent the next couple decades photographing the fine details of dilapidated and otherwise non-airworthy prop liners on the tarmac in St. Louis and throughout the United States. I also traded my photographs with similarly minded enthusiasts in Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Early in this period, the disappearing prop liners were still considered by the public as old technology junk compared to sexy jet technology. The term prop liner didn't exist, and even the seasoned aviation community that loved old warbirds really had no interest in a stale topic which involved obsolete, non-combat related junkyard scrap. Thankfully, all this changed by the early 1980s with the UK aviation journalist Stephen Pearcey and his fabulous periodical Propliner magazine, coupled with his 1984 pictorial book, Skytruck. Most horribly, Pearcey died in a plane crash just as Skytruck went to press, but many fine authors followed on with his work, actually facilitating increasing public awareness and enthusiasm for the topic. However, Stephen Pearcy is clearly the father of the prop liner awareness and appreciation that exists today. In 1986, I saw this photo in an issue of Challenge Publications' Warbirds International magazine of a dilapidated L-1049H Super Constellation which had been sold for $4,000 at auction in Mesa, Arizona. Seeing this, I had a vivid, though unlikely premonition that this aircraft would be saved by someone as an airworthy flying museum. Also, I did not at first connect that this aircraft was the very same 37 Charlie that appeared in the Terry Morgan Constellation book almost 2 decades earlier. This premonition proved a reality a year later when I found out about Save A Connie in Kansas City. Paul Pristo was the man who purchased 37 Charlie at auction for $4,000, and he kindly donated it to the group. When I found out about the project about 6 months after it started, I promptly became one of 46 charter members of that group, which even included the notorious Transworld Airlines villain, Carl Icahn. Most of the active volunteers were retired Transworld Airlines crews, mechanics, and other professionals. These volunteers, as assembled by Save A Connie president and founder Larry Brown, have repeatedly told the full and accurate story of Save A Connie, so it's not my place to tell that story here. I should mention Save A Connie is now known as the Airline History Museum in Kansas City, a much better name in my opinion. For 3 years, my wife Karen and I spent a weekend a month driving between St. Louis and Kansas City to work on the restoration. Larry Brown and the volunteers were most cordial, welcoming, and appreciative of our involvement. Karen and I were essentially unskilled volunteers, qualified only to take apart and clean things, but not to put them back together. The latter was left mainly to the retired professionals who had spent years operating and maintaining the Super Constellation with TWA. As we strip the paint off the vertical tail surfaces, look what bubbles up. The slick airways, blue tail stripes, originally seen in Terry Morgan's 1967 book, and also seen in several follow-on Constellation books and photos by various authors. I especially liked the activities centering on replacing and building up of the 18-cylinder Curtiss-Wright R3350 turbo compound engines. In their heyday, they developed 3,400 horsepower each on takeoff, but due to repeated overhauls and lack of high-octane 115-145 avgas, takeoff power was now limited to about 2,800 horsepower. I was also able to assist in putting the first part back onto the plane, this under fuselage access hatch. It was actually the toilet drain. I fully recorded our personal experiences in those earlier days of Save A Connie in my written records, photographs, and videos. Again, these were our personal perspectives only and did not represent the individual or collective experiences of the many professional volunteers in the group. They scraped their skin to the knuckle bones and broke their fingers and legs. All I did was get a little dirty and go home. They worked tirelessly every day. Unfortunately, I lived 250 miles away and had to hold down my day job to boot, but was glad to get out there when I could. I savored the combined stench of machine oil, paint solvent, hydraulic fluid, and heavy grease that permeated the hangar. Even though I didn't hold an airframe and power plant certificate, one of the few other build-up roles I was qualified for was the initial restoration of 37 Charlie's wing tip tanks, namely just banging out dents with a rubber mallet from a highly claustrophobic position inside the oil-drenched tanks. My clothing and body were covered with preservation oil, but I loved every minute of it. However, I was extremely concerned about my car's upholstery on my 250-mile drive back to St. Louis that day. In June or July 1988, the aircraft had been painted in a quasi-TWA livery. However, the TWA legal department initially forbade using the Trans World Airlines trade name on the aircraft for fear of all things, the public thinking that our Super Constellation was TWA's current frontline equipment. Years later, this thankfully changed, and Star of America was eventually allowed to fly in authentic Trans World Airlines markings. In July 1988, a dedication ceremony was held at Kansas City Downtown Airport, a full year before its post-restoration maiden flight. Dedication speakers included Save A Connie president and founder Larry Brown, as well as original 7 Mercury astronaut M. Scott Carpenter and John Testrake, famed pilot in the 1985 Beirut terrorist hijacking of a TWA 727. However, even after this celebrated event, the work was not over, as it took an additional year of hard work and certification processes to make Star of America airworthy. The original goal was to fly Star of America to Oshkosh in 1989, but this did not happen until Oshkosh 1990. One big problem was finding authentic passenger seats and interior furnishings, which took many more years to only partially complete. But they eventually did fairly well, even incorporating the original Dreyfuss artwork on the cabin walls. While Star of America depicts a civilian TWA airliner, both the Navy and the Air Force flew Super Constellations in diverse roles under the core military designation C-121. Actually, Star of America spent its operating life as a civilian freighter, but she still did have a military role with the cargo operator Slick Airways, starting all the way back to her 1958 factory delivery. In the mid-1960s, under military contract, she flew round trips between California and Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Vietnam. She flew arms and ordnance in and performed the grim task of transporting fallen servicemen out. As you can see, she has the small arms bullet hole patches to prove it. I was also fortunate enough to be one of the early passengers on Star of America after its restoration, and fully recorded the event on tape, which will be the subject of a future video presentation. Also, around that time, I wrote a detailed article on the post-war evolution of the large radial engines powering the prop liners that appeared in Airliners magazine. In subsequent years, I produced, marketed, and sold worldwide video programs on the Super Constellation and some of the very last DC-6B and DC-7C freighter operations out of Miami, Florida, under the Regulus Productions banner, and wholesaled them through World Transport Press in Miami. I'd like to point out that during my filming of Star of America's 1989 maiden flight, I didn't notice any other videographers on site, only still photographers. While other footage of this unique event may exist, I haven't seen it anywhere to date. Ironically, there were no local news media present from our vantage point at this newsworthy event, even though Save A Connie had considerable previous coverage during primary restoration. So here it is. Enjoy the only footage of this event known to exist and where it all began for me. (6937) Charlie, Star of America, will fly. How you doing, Captain?
Well, hello. Hey. How are you?
What's going on?
Well,
You ready to go?
We're going to fly that airplane today.
Good.
It's going to go.
I'm here to watch.
You're here to take pictures.
I'm here to take pictures, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for calling me, by the way.
Hey, listen, it was my pleasure.
Okay. Take care. Good luck. Well, I wish I could be here. This would be the most fun place to be today. The second best place to be would be here today. Don't bounce the passengers.
What do you want me to do?
Give them away.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I want to see those seats.
Give you any wrong information, but we're set up to take off to the south now,
Oh, okay.
and we'll be breaking ground right out in here somewhere.
Okay, so
Heading
I'm gonna
south.
go back down by the terminal then.
Okay.
Think
if
so?
If you go down there, I think the gear and the doors will be tucked up. by the
Okay,
time we
you're
get
actually gonna
over there.
retract the gear, huh?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good.
Certainly.
Gee.
We want this thing tucked up nice.
Alrighty. Clean, huh?
Clean.
Alrighty.
Hi, how you?
There's a little airplane over there.
And then we'll get you out.
About a mile and a half, and then we'll get you.
Okay, steady out there.
Oh, it is.
Woo! Yeah, you can see it now pretty good.
2 Papa Brown, we can start your right base now, square the base to final. 2 Papa Brown. Hey, 37 Charlie, taxi into position and hold. 37 Charlie, position and hold.
He's on the road.
68 November, no traffic observed to the east, frequency change approved, have a good flight. 36 number, welcome. 77 Tango, where do you park today? 77 Tango, where do you park? Southwest hangar, make a right turn there, Delta, be next intersection, ground point 9 off the runway. Heading 37 Charlie, runway 19er, clear for takeoff. The wind's 210 at 6.
Here we go.
Right on the wind, like make a right turn. Turn out is approved. 2 Papa Bravo, runway 19er, clear for touch and go. Papa Bravo. 2 Papa Bravo, caution wake turbulence, departing Connie. Papa Bravo, we'll watch the touch.
Yeah, you can't even see the.
Huh?
You can barely see it.
Barely see it right.
That's terrible.
How to get something.
Oh, to get something.
2 of us tried.
Did you?
Huh?
Boy, this door
I did
sounded
too.
good.
Hey, you know something I found out? With this winder, my counter did not move up. That's where I had my trouble. Yeah, it's still sitting where I left it on 3.